In late spring, Thames Estuary venues start getting into gear, and for me, it's time to seek out a few new locations as well as revisiting those that I'm used to fishing. Greenhythe is one of those I've looked over several times, but I've never got round to fishing. Before trying Crossways, I looked in on a match in progress. It was quiet, but a few flounders had already been caught. That convinced me it was worth a go. The following day, I was eager to go down there, and the fish just passed where the match length finished. I decided to fish the right-hand side of a ferry jetty. The previous day, a couple of anglers fished the left-hand side of a jetty, and when I walked past, one of them had caught a 52cm bass and an eel. Greenhythe's on the Kent side of the Thames, adjacent to the Dartford crossing. The map shows familiar nearby venues which are all worth fishing. Opposite Greenhythe, you have the West Thurrock marks of Stone Nest Point, Procter and Gamble, and Grace Wharf. To the east of Greenhythe is Swanscombe Peninsula. Ingress Park is in the town itself, and to the west you have the Dartford crossing and Crossways. The match I looked in on was between the Sand Jetty and the Ferry Jetty, accessed by a public footpath at Quadron Court. The map pinpoints the location I fished for this video. For the first session, I arrived a couple of hours before the top of the tide, and the first rod's already gone out there with a 3-hook clip-down rig. I'm setting up my other rod to fish with a boom rig. Here I'm using my Gravel Technos Jury rods. Because there's a strong pull here, the rod that's gone out has got 30-pound braid, just in case the rig gets dragged and I have to pull it out for snag. However, I'm using 20-pound braid on the rod I've just set up, since I'll be fishing the boom rig slightly closer in. There might still be snags there, but I'm not expecting the pull to be quite as strong. I'm using my favoured long wire boom rig, and I've attached a flat lead to the clip on the bottom boom. I will swap this over to lead with grip wires if the tidal pull is too strong. For a change, I've brought my larger lugworm in paper, since it's been in the fridge for a few days. The broken worms and smaller ones are still in the blue bucket. I've selected larger worms for the clip down rig, hoping that I might catch a bass on it, and here I'm picking out slightly smaller ones for the boom rig. Most of my boom rigs for fishing for soles have got size 3 Nordic bend hooks. This rig has them tied to 10-pound red Maxima line. If there aren't any snags, I use these hooks tied to 8-pound fluorocarbon. Fish and chip shop style paper has the ragworm in it. This is a bit old and not of great quality, but still usable. Baiting up a spare short wire boom rig, which is attached to a breakaway lead with wires. Should I not get any action on the clip down rig, I'll swap over to this one. I much prefer to use boom rigs if I'm specifically targeting soles on the Thames. Although I don't think the short wire one is quite as good as the one with long wires, it does allow me to cast a little bit further. Now that I'm ready for some action, a quick pan round the area and then a closer look at the rigs. You can just about make out the Dartford crossing behind the Ferry Jetty. The tall pylons are at Gamble and Proctor and at Sponscombe Peninsula. The housing in the distance is at Greenhythe. Then you've got the factories at Quadrant Court. My gear is set out as usual and I'm not keen on using broddies or shelters. The rigs are the ones I've just talked about and have shown me baiting up. I could have fished a little beach to my right, but I'm expecting that to get covered in water as the tide comes in. My first bite is to the boom rig. And that's a great start, with a salted a ragworm on the middle boom. Unfortunately, it then gets a bit chilly, with more than just a few rain droplets, but after putting on my jacket, I get another bite on the boom rig. Well, it felt like there was something there, but it didn't stay on for too long. It looks like that was a bite on a lugworm. Nothing seems to have shown an interest to the larger lugworm on the clip-down rig, so I'm swapping over to the short wire boom rig. Since I've had a sole and another bite on a long wire boom rig, I decided to cast this one out roughly the same sort of range. Although it hasn't got windy, it's become a bit unpleasant now, with some quite heavy showers, and as we approach high tide, there isn't the same sort of bend in my rod tips. I'm dragging my rigs now and again, but since occasionally they have got stuck, I'm doing it quite sharply. And I'm having to wide in quite quickly, with the rods raised quite high, since I am coming across a few obstructions. And there's now tiny pieces of weed getting stuck onto the line, which need to be plucked off. Without doing this, it will hamper casting, and possibly might lead to crack-offs. Tide is on the turn and the current strength has dropped quite considerably, so I'm swapping my lead with wires to one which hasn't got any. As soon as the current picks up again on the ebb, I'll probably swap back, but in the meantime this should be sufficient to hold bottom and still allow me to drag the baits with less chance of anything getting stuck. When the rig has just gone out, I get a little rattle, which is worth striking into. Well, it's not a sole, but it's a whiting on the top boom, which again is on the ragworm. Then, immediately on recasting, I get a similar sort of bite, but this time it's a flounder on the top boom. So, just like the match that was here the day before, this ended up not being a particularly hectic session, but I'm pleased on catching 2 flatfish, and of course I'm very happy to catch a sole. A few days later, I couldn't resist having another go at the same spot. This time I brought my Karmic 07 rods, which are a little bit stiffer. Unfortunately, I did lose a boom rig last time, so I've teamed up with the real 30-pound braid for fishing with a boom rig. The 3-hook clip down rig didn't produce last time, so instead I've gone for one of my special sole rigs. These have short snuds and are pennelled. The boom rigs are the same as the ones I've used before, but I've decided not to use the flat lead this time. I've got here very early in the morning, just after sunrise, to catch the morning tide. First cast with sole rig and I get a bite. Unfortunately it gets stuck and I break off. Before I can set up again, I get a bite on the boom rig. Okay, so it's not one of the bigger bass that reside down here, but at least it gets me off the mark. My sole rigs are now stored in my bulging rig wallet. I make sure I carry many duplicate rigs, just in case I do lose the ones which I catch on. However, I haven't got that many 2-snid versions of my sole rig that I've just lost, but eventually I'll find one which will do to replace it. I'm going to need to have another rig tying session fairly soon, since these rigs are the ones that I catch most of my soles on in more open water rather than in estuaries. They work very well on the south coast for fishing at distance for soles. However, I still find that boom rigs outscore them when fishing for soles on the Thames Estuary. No more bites come to that sole rig, so I switched back to using boom rigs. One of the things I like about fishing the Thames is when there's not much happening bite-wise, there's always something else going on to keep your interest, particularly if you like watching cargo vessels and ferries going up and down a river. There was a bit of a wait, but eventually I get my next bite. And that's much better. I'm happy with that. It's a sizable sole. That fish came just before the top of the tide, which is now slackening off. Another bite, which is just a couple of rattles, but I decided to strike into it. Before the rig temporarily gets stuck into something, I managed to put it free. And it feels like there's something on. It's another flatfish, but only a small flounder this time. And the bites are picking up now, which is about time. But like the previous day, when the tide starts turning, I'm finding a few more snags. There is some weed growth on the underwater obstructions, and I'm getting stuck now and again. I've got a fairly reasonable fish on, so I've got to be gentle how I pull this out. Slightly better scory bass. Another little knock results in another bass, but this time much smaller. I fished the tide down, but unfortunately that was it for this session. No more bites followed. Normally on the Thames you get bites about 3/4 of an hour and about an hour and a half down the tide, but not on this occasion. Nevertheless, it's still fairly early in the season, and I'm really pleased that I've opened my sole account, so these were 2 quite enjoyable sessions.